Da, Fenestra.
This video will contain spoilers for the entirety of Hollow Knight Silksong, including the true ending. If you haven't finished the game yet and want to experience the story for yourself, I recommend coming back to this video after you've had the chance to play it. Also, an enormous thank you to BeardBear for providing a lot of the footage for this video. Link to their video will be down in the description, and we'll talk more about that at the very end. Silksong is finally ours to experience, and oh, what an experience it is. The game itself is a mechanical joy, the world is sprawling and packed with fascinating characters and areas, and the music. Where can I even start when talking about the music? Once again, Christopher Larkin graces us with genius from the moment the game starts until the last name in the credits fades out. And because I'm a musician myself with a minor in music theory, I think that at least somewhat qualifies me to talk at length about his brilliant music and the leitmotif that underscores the entire game. As you might have guessed based on the title of this video, that motif is the Dies Irae. So what is the Dies Irae? There are plenty of other videos that go over it in depth, so I won't spend too much time on it. We're here to talk about how it's used in Silksong after all. But to give you some quick context, the Dies Irae is a musical phrase that has come to be associated with death. It was originally a Gregorian chant from the 13th century based on a poem by the same name, which was then set to music. Over the centuries, it came into the spotlight of popular musical culture through composers like Hector Berlioz, who used the Dies Irae outside of a religious context for the first time in his Symphonie Fantastique, specifically in the fifth movement, Dream of a Witch's Sabbath. After that, many other contemporary composers of the time began to use the Dies Irae in their own music. Today it's used in all sorts of contexts, even movies and television shows, with some examples including Star Wars, The Lion King, The Shining, and even more recently, Squid Game. The most important takeaway here, though, is that the Dies Irae is a musical motif that represents death, and it sounds like this. That was an excerpt from the 1976 performance by the French National Orchestra, conducted by Leonard Bernstein, performing Symphonie Fantastique, specifically the aforementioned fifth movement. Now that you have a little context for what the Dies Irae actually is and what it sounds like, let's talk about its role in Silksong's soundtrack. A lot of what I'm going to tell you is, of course, my own interpretation of the music as I'm hearing it. Only Christopher Larkin himself could ever know exactly what he was feeling and thinking when he composed these pieces, after all. But a wonderful aspect of music is that it opens itself up to interpretation and analysis from everyone who hears it, and each person can provide a unique point of view and perspective. So that's what I hope to present to you here today. As one final note, this video is not a deep musical analysis of every single piece of music in the game. Though each one could absolutely warrant one from one perspective or another, this video is meant to shine a light on the fact that the Dies Irae is ever present throughout Silksong's soundtrack, and theorize about why Christopher Larkin chose to use it in the ways he did. We won't be doing deep dives into every single track or anything like that, though we'll have the chance to get very specific about a few towards the end. Now, with all that said, grab a snack, kick back, and join me as we unmask the music of Silksong. To find our first instance of the Dies Irae, we need look no further than the title screen. In fact, the very first melodic statement we hear in the game is this leitmotif. The musical theme of death is what greets us all the moment we boot up Silksong. Why? Well, I have a few theories, but why don't we circle back to them at the very end? The rest of the game will give us a lot of context for those theories, and it'll make for a nice full circle moment. Immediately after we hit New Game, we encounter the Dies Irae in the opening cutscene where Hornet is being taken to Pharloom. You can even hear it in the first bell that rings. It's pretty easy to link the use of the motif here to the fact that Hornet is being carried into a land of death, far away from the place she once called home. You could also argue that it's a representation of Hornet's capture, the death of her freedom. If the bugs of the Citadel succeed in bringing her to their ultimate destination, who knows what might happen to our beloved main character from there. And we actually don't know what the Citadel's plans were for Hornet if she had been successfully taken there. At least I don't think we do. And it doesn't really matter anyway, because of course she escapes at the first opportunity that presents itself. Following that opening cutscene, the next time we encounter the Dies Irae is actually in the music underscoring the Marrow. Nothing before that features the motif in any form. Interestingly, the first time it appears happens pretty deep into the track and comprises the melody, but it's elongated and doesn't feel exactly the same as when we heard it on the title screen or in the intro cutscene. Take a listen. When you're searching for it, it's pretty easy to spot, but when I first played the game, I never noticed the Dies Irae being present in this theme. So what exactly does that mean? Well, given what we know about Pharloom and the pilgrimage the lesser bugs are expected to take to the Citadel, I think it's pretty safe to say that it's representing the fact that the pilgrims will face a journey steeped in danger and death if they want to make their way to their destination. And the fact that they'll walk with death the entire trip is obvious from the initial steps they take into the very first area. The next time we hear the Dies Irae on our journey is incredibly obvious, that being when we ring the first grand bell following our battle and subsequent partnership with Irae. It was the first time I realized the Dies Irae would be prevalent in this game, though I didn't understand just how much until I dug deeper for this video. Anyway, here's Hornet ringing that bell for us. The interesting thing about the bells of the Citadel sounding the notes of the Dies Irae is actually that it's the most overt and obvious playing of the motif so far, and the first time we hear something tied directly to the Citadel, it's very clearly this death motif. Even if we ignore the opening cutscenes entirely, this bell alone is telling us that the Citadel is not what it seems, despite what most of the pilgrims are led to believe. For all we know, it may very well be steeped in death in the same way the lowlands are. We hear the Dies Irae immediately again in the Repose theme that plays within the bell tower after the bench appears. This is the same song that plays in each bellway room or safe area we find outside of towns, so we do hear this one a lot, and the melody is comprised almost entirely of our Leitmotif. I think a pretty easy interpretation of this one is that Hornet is journeying through a land steeped in curses and death, but these little moments of rest and respite serve as a safe haven. There's a more hopeful tone to the use of the motif in this context. It gives a feeling of calmness and relaxation to the player, a light in the darkness of the haunted kingdom of Pharloom. We next hear the Dies Irae as we make our way to Deep Docks. This time it's a bit more understated than the front and center melody line from the Marrow, but you can still pick it out pretty easily if you're listening for it. It only happens during that one moment in the Deep Docks music, but I believe it's just another way to reinforce the idea that as you continue deeper into Pharloom, whether you're Hornet or the Pilgrims, you approach death with each and every step you take. It could even be a slight hint at the fact that the death of Pharloom much later in the game will lead us back to Deep Docks, though I think that idea is a bit of a stretch by comparison. Anyway, after defeating Lace and entering Far Fields, we're confronted by the Dies Irae once more. It happens very early on in the piece and is obviously present in the melody, underscoring our journey through this new area. The fact that the motif is much more prevalent in this field theme than any other we've heard so far seems to indicate that not only is the journey becoming more dangerous the closer we get to the Citadel, but that this area in particular is more coated in death than those that came before it. If we take a look at Pilgrim's Rest, we can even see evidence of the fear of death present here. The shopkeeper Mort keeps his door locked and shut at all times, charging an entry fee to those who find his camp. He does this in part to keep himself safe and the outside dangers at bay, and in part because he's a greedy little coward. I mean, seriously, 30 rosaries every time I want to open the door? Actually, did you know you can break the door mechanism and gain permanent entry for free? But if you do that, at some point later, a rhino beetle will actually attack the safe house when you return to it. That's kind of a cool, practical demonstration of the danger we've been talking about that exists in Farfields. Anyway, getting back to the point, I think it's also possible that Farfields is the place where most pilgrims begin to lose hope that they'll ever be able to see their journey through to the end. The climb is brutal, and very few seem to even make it to Pilgrim's Rest in the first place. In that sense, the death motif present in the music could represent literal death as well as metaphorical. The idea that the pilgrims' dreams of reaching the citadel are impossible to achieve, the death of their hope. Anyway, as we continue on Hornet's journey through Pharloom, we next arrive in Greymoor, yet another area whose theme utilizes the Dies Irae, though it's a bit more understated than Farfields' was. The Dies Irae here takes on a somber and melancholic feel, more so than any other iteration of it that we've heard so far. If you take a look at Greymoor, you can see why, too. It's a dark, dreary landscape plagued by the threads of the haunting. What was probably a much livelier land in the past has been destroyed and reduced to a shadow of its former self. Even the halfway home, the first openly friendly camp we've seen since Bone Bottom, is mostly deserted aside from 2 or 3 friendly faces. No matter what point in the game you return to this location, you won't find many characters here. This area has been choked by death more than any other we've encountered so far, the effects of the haunting much more obvious here in Greymoor than they were in the lowlands. As we continue alongside Hornet, we next come to Bellhart, trapped beneath a threaded curse. The haunting has captured every resident of this otherwise thriving town, the first we've seen in Pharloom, and Hornet decides to save them. To that end, we journey into Shellwood, the forested area to the west, and it's here that we encounter the Dies Irae yet again. Its presence is much more understated compared to Greymoor, just a small background use of the motif behind the melodies and chords underscoring the forests of Shellwood. Not only does its subtle use imply that there are dangers hidden deep within the forest, and indeed there are between Sister Splinter and that witch that eventually ends up infecting us with a parasite, but it could also signify that the closer to the citadel we journey, the more the death and decay of Pharloom is deliberately being swept under the rug. The citadel and its inhabitants likely wanted the truth of things to be obscured the closer to their ultimate destination the pilgrims climbed. You can even see that in the area design itself. Shellwood is the first area that looks more friendly and inviting by comparison to most of the areas that came before it. Mind you, it's not, but it looks like it is. Anyway, after defeating Widow and freeing the town from the haunting, we can now see Bellhart in a state much closer to the way it was. Most of its inhabitants have lost their lives to the curse that befell them, a tragic thing to be sure, but there's still hope in those that remain, and we can hear that very clearly in the music. The Dies Irae is on full display here yet again, but this time it takes on a much different tone. It isn't bombastic or even steeped in misery. It feels more tragic at the start, a lament of those lost to the haunting, but eventually becomes more uplifting as the track continues. I think this can be viewed as a symbol of what Hornet has accomplished in saving the people that still call Bellhart home. There isn't much hope left in Pharloom, and much was lost to Widow's attack, but there are still many bugs alive that are grateful for what Hornet did and are willing to treasure their lives and their dreams for the future. This, I think, is the first time the musical motif of death is deliberately recontextualized into a more hopeful rendition, as if Christopher Larkin is twisting the meaning of the motif itself. I think this also parallels some of Hornet's character development, but we'll come back to that part at the end. As we continue our journey, we next come to the Blasted Steppes, where the Dies Irae is notably absent entirely from the area music. Honestly, I expected I'd hear it in this zone more than almost any other, but no. The idea that the Citadel wants to hide the truth of the land from the pilgrims as they approach the Grand Gate only gets stronger here, even though the judge enemies kill many of the pilgrims as they attempt to pass. It's rather ironic that the area I most suspected to use the motif of death actually has the most hostile enemies to the pilgrims we've witnessed. It's all the more interesting that those bugs are still sentient and in service to the Citadel, not brainwashed monsters who have just lost their minds. Anyway, we finally come to the entrance that leads to the Grand Gate of the Citadel, where Hornet plays her new needle in and causes each bell to resonate. Once again, we're greeted by the sonorous sounds of the Dies Irae before the last judge attacks. You'll notice, by the way, that I haven't talked about a single boss fight so far, and that's because none of their themes use our musical death motif in any way, shape, or form, at least not to my ear. That'll change much later, but for now, we defeat the last judge and prepare to take our first steps into Act 2. But what if you went another way to gain access to the Citadel? What if you went northeast from Greymoor instead of southwest towards Bellhart? If you did that, you'd come upon the Sinner's Road, perhaps named as such because those who felt they couldn't complete the trial could still gain access to the Citadel by going through a back entrance if they searched hard enough, a sin in the eyes of the religious order of the land. This idea is actually represented in the music as well, music that once again employs our Dies Irae. It's very subtle and almost unrecognizable, but I believe it's a very deliberate choice to use the motif that way. Sinner's Road itself is a dangerous place, but one that strays from the watchful eye of the Citadel and provides the pilgrims with an alternative to the death-steeped journey they've been cast into. Those desperate enough might just choose to brave these dangers where their survival, though not assured, might be a bit more attainable. To that end, I think using the Dies Irae in this subtle, almost unrecognizable way is a musical representation of the fact that though death still lurks along every path to the Citadel, at least here it isn't so much being hidden away from sight as there is an actual choice being offered to the pilgrims, one that might not result in their deaths if they're lucky. Or maybe I'm just reaching a bit. Either way, unless you know about the hidden wall that takes you directly to the mist, the next stop on your journey is Bilewater. Oh, Bilewater, what a hellscape you are. But you wouldn't know it from just listening to the music alone. In fact, I think Bilewater has one of the most beautiful themes in the entire game, and it also features a brilliant twisting of our Dies Irae. Here, the Dies Irae is recontextualized into a somber melody with a major chord resolution underneath it at the end of the musical phrase. I do think this is recognizable as being our death motif even still, and very deliberately so. To me, using the Dies Irae like this represents the tragedy of Bilewater, an area that was once likely a lush, gorgeous landscape that was poisoned and destroyed by the Citadel, both literally and figuratively. The waste they poured down onto the area mutated and destroyed it, choked the life out of the lands and left them a toxic cesspool, and the inhabitants of this land rightly hate the Citadel and all who would willingly be a part of it, transforming their lives from peaceful inhabitants of the land to crusaders bent on vengeance. It's a tragic tale of death and decay, and it is beautifully represented in the music by the Dies Irae. Now, to complete this journey to the Citadel through that back entrance, one would have to brave the mist and the exhaust organ, where they would find the entrance guarded by Phantom, a being said to be Lace's sister. But since the Dies Irae doesn't appear in any of those themes, we'll simply say that if you do all of that and triumph over Phantom, you'll reach the Citadel just like you would if you challenged the last judge. Regardless of which path you take, Act 2 is waiting to greet you. Though you can, at least for a time, skip the Underworks, I think it follows our narrative a bit better to allow Hornet to fall down that elevator shaft and into the pits of the Citadel. Down in the Underworks, there's actually no sign of the Dies Irae at all, either in musical motif or in environmental effect. I believe this is a very deliberate choice, as the Citadel uses the Underworks to extract as much labor and money from new arrivals as possible. As such, they want the Underworks to seem like a necessary step on the journey to the upper levels, and so the lies that wrap the Midlands continue to stifle the truth of Pharloom even more aggressively here in the depths of their holy tower. But eventually, we make our way out into the Choral Chambers, where a truly beautiful piece of music greets us. It feels uplifting and joyous, almost like you've just stepped into heaven itself. And after being subjected to who knows how long in the Underworks, any pilgrim that made their way up here would likely feel the same way. And yet, if you look and listen closely enough, you'll find another fascinating use of the Dies Irae. Am I reaching by arguing that the main melody of this area uses the death motif? Maybe, but hear me out, and then you can decide for yourself if you agree. In my eyes, the melody of the choral chamber features an inversion of the Dies Irae. It starts with the same 3 notes before lifting up instead of falling down. This inherently gives that melody a more hopeful character as opposed to the darker nature of a descending melodic statement. But at the same time, I believe it's a brilliant way to obscure the Dies Irae by hiding its influence in plain sight. No matter how gilded the halls or how polished the chambers, it still can't completely hide the truth from sharp eyes. The truth that the Citadel's existence only further destroys the land of Pharloom for no other reason than the personal gain of those in its upper echelons. Or maybe I'm just full of it, that's entirely possible too. Either way, as we continue along our journey with Hornet, we eventually stumble upon the first shrine, where we ring one last grand bell and hear the Dies Irae once more, serving as a beacon of truth in the shroud of lies that is the Citadel. This holds true for the settlement that crops up around it as well, Songclave. And indeed, the musical theme of Songclave prominently features our dear Dies Irae. The motif is immediately present, but this time in a hopeful context, if one with a somber undertone. This is the one place inside the Citadel that can be considered safe, a bastion against the lies that serves to protect the pilgrims that find it, thanks in no small part to the efforts of Hornet herself. After defeating the Cogwork dancers and entering the Cogwork Core, we discover a complete lack of Dies Irae in its area theme. This could be because the area isn't really supposed to be open to anyone. The core serves to house the inner workings of the Citadel, overseen exclusively by mechanical beings. There's nothing to hide here, nor is there any indication of the death that plagues the land amongst the gears and spikes. Or maybe using it just didn't fit into the musical identity of the area, I don't know. Either way, we eventually make our way to the Whispering Vaults, where the Dies Irae is very much on display and in a much more obvious rendition than we've heard in the Citadel so far, outside of Songclave at least. Here, the corruption of the Citadel starts to seep through the gilded lies more openly. The death and destruction that has not only consumed the Citadel, but the lands beneath it, is much more obvious in the musical theme of this area, the Dies Irae serving to underscore that truth to anyone who chooses to look closely enough. The deserted, broken halls of the Whispering Vaults could hardly be mistaken for something grand and inviting anymore. After a winding trek, we make our way up to High Halls, the pinnacle of the Citadel's upper echelon, and here we can once again pick out an interesting inversion of the Dies Irae. It's a bit hard to hear, and it's entirely possible too that I'm reaching a bit too far with this one. The main statement of the melody in the oboe is the same shape as the Dies Irae, but it employs different notes to create its tune. If this is truly the case, it represents that the death and decay of the world below is starting to seep into even the highest realms of the Citadel, despite their attempt to deny the truth. If, however, that's a bridge too far and you think the Dies Irae isn't present in high halls at all, I could pretty easily be convinced of that. From that perspective then, if the motif of death isn't present in the musical accompaniment for the area, perhaps that's representative of the fact that high halls serves as a holy sanctuary for those that call it home, a place so far removed from the curse of death below that they are largely unaffected by it even now. As a brief aside, if we were to exit the Choral Chambers to the west, we'd find our way to the Slab, a prison the Citadel employs as a means of casting away the undesirables. Interestingly, this is another location I expected would feature the Dies Irae more prominently, yet it's entirely absent from the theme. I believe this is a musical reflection of the lies the Citadel told its believers. Those within the Slab seem to believe themselves as undergoing a trial that will absolve them of their sins, not languishing away in captivity. Though it's obvious this isn't the truth to both us and Hornet, very few within the Slab can be convinced of that. The lack of the Dies Irae once again serves as proof that the Citadel has been successful in hiding the truth of this place too. It's a prison where those they deem unwanted or dangerous are left to die, cast aside by the religious order that enslaves the lands of Pharloom. Back with Hornet in the Citadel now, after we assemble the pieces of the threefold song, we ascend to the cradle where we dual lace again before gaining access to the final approach leading to the Monarch of Pharloom. Until now I haven't mentioned the Silk Hearts, but let's talk about them briefly as this will tie into the Act 2 final boss quite nicely. After collecting each Silk Heart, we experience a flashback of sorts where after climbing a strange obstacle course we hear the inner thoughts of someone. I believe this being to be the Monarch of Pharloom herself, but I'm not positive in that assumption. Either way, as we climb these flashbacks we can hear a piece of music called Awakening. The piece utilizes the beginning of the Dies Irae to underscore our ascent, as if we're climbing upwards away from the death that exists below. Interestingly, this idea is completely turned on its head as we climb the cradle in reality. On our approach to the final confrontation, we find the same strange platforms that lead us upwards, only this time the music gets louder and louder as we climb. It's as if we're climbing towards death instead of away from it. And indeed, death is what greets us at the top. Hornet feels no fear as she stares down the Monarch of Pharloom, but the kingdom itself has been steeped in death by this pale being for an untold amount of time. The intensity of the Dies Irae as we climb is quite literal here, I think. Hornet is climbing towards the being that caused the death of this land, the being that she set out to slay by her own hand at the very beginning of the game. And it is here, as that fated battle begins, that we hear the most overt use of the Dies Irae in the entire soundtrack. Grandmother Silk's battle theme and its use of the Dies Irae is bombastic in a way we haven't heard this motif expressed yet. Here it's prominent, aggressive, and powerful like no other place in the soundtrack. The first phrase is an extension of the 4-note motif we've heard throughout the game so far, repeating 3 times as it steps down further and further. Not only does the Dies Irae itself evoke ideas of fear, uncertainty, and death, but combining that with a cascade of descending motion where the motif repeats itself again and again and again serves to underscore the hopeless darkness of the struggle. But Hornet doesn't falter even in the face of the Monarch. You can hear that reflected in the music too, as the Dies Irae motif that makes up the melody line instead begins ascending in repetition instead of descending like it did at the beginning of the battle. You know, you should really listen to this entire piece sometime. The Dies Irae is all over this one. Seriously, I could spend 15 minutes dissecting Awakening alone, but the scope of this video has already gotten entirely out of hand as it is, so I'll just give you the Cliff Notes version for now, and maybe we'll come back to this one in more detail someday. Soon enough though, Hornet emerges victorious, pinning the pale being beneath her needle. And in that moment, if you've managed to set the snare to remove the Monarch from her perch atop Pharloom, you'll be presented with the option to play your needle in and trap her. And what, dear viewer, do you suppose Hornet plays on her instrument to spring that trap? It's the same rendition of the motif that just played at the start of the fight with Grandmother Silk, the Dies Irae lifted into a slightly higher part of the key center. Either way though, this motif must represent the death of the Pale Monarch, right? Well, that answer is both yes and no. If you've played the game, you know that while the snare succeeds and Grandmother Silk is taken by the void, Lace stops her from pulling Hornet in with her, instead falling into the void herself as an act of vengeance. And this prompts Grandmother Silk to resist the void, struggling to such an extent that the very kingdom of Pharloom threatens to come crumbling down on top of itself. So in this particular context, the Dies Irae can also represent the death of the entire kingdom. If, of course, nothing is done about it. As an injured Hornet attempts to find out what's become of Pharloom, she stumbles across a group of bugs that had once worked in the Citadel. They become infected with the void and attack her. During this fight, a piece of music called Dark Descent plays, and within this music exists, I think, the most interesting idea connected to the Dies Irae of all. Can you hear it? Our motif of death? No, actually you can't. Not really, at least. But stick with me for a moment. I've argued the whole time that the Dies Irae is the undercurrent of the music in Silksong, present throughout a majority of the game. So I would consider it safe to say that the Dies Irae is the musical theme of Grandmother Silk and the Citadel as a whole. Dark Descent, on the other hand, is the musical representation of the Void, a potentially primordial source of wanton destruction and annihilation, something empty that seeks to consume. And it's in the first statement of the Void's melodic theme that I would argue exists the most fascinating inversion of the Dies Irae in the entire soundtrack. I'm about to get into a bit of specific music theory, and I apologize in advance to probably most of you. In the initial statement of the melody in Dark Descent, we hear a 3-note figure repeated many times to underscore the intensity of the situation. And I would argue that this 3-note figure is actually a Phrygian inversion of the Dies Irae motif. Wow, that's a lot of words I just said that probably mean nothing to a lot of people. Let me explain a little without getting way too deep into the weeds here. Phrygian is the third mode of a major scale, which notably features the second note of said scale being lowered by a half step. In this case, the middle note of the Dies Irae motif is what would be lowered. So if the motif were 3-2-3-1, where each number represents the note of the scale that makes up the idea, then the new motif would be 3-2-3-1. Let me demonstrate. If the Dies Irae would be 3-2-3-1, then lowering the second note would get you 3, 2, 3, 1. On top of that, the Dies Irae motif returns to the third note multiple times throughout its statement. But if I were to reverse that, invert the shape of the entire motif, the first note would be the center of the idea. 1, 2, 1, 3. Now, if I add the Phrygian note, that flat 2 we talked about just a minute ago, the figure sounds like this. 1, 2, 1, 3. And if I just continue looping that figure on itself, we pretty easily arrive at a figure that sounds like this. 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1, 3, 1, 2, 1. Now, does that sound familiar? You might disagree with me here. That is entirely okay if you do. Hell, Christopher Larkin might disagree with me if that's not what he actually intended to do here. But to my ear and interpretation, Dark Descent uses a twisted inversion of the Dies Irae as its motivic center. But why am I making such a big deal out of this, aside from the fact that I just think it's cool? Does it really matter that much? I think it does, honestly. I find the idea fascinating from both an in-game world-building angle and from a meta perspective. If the theme of Grandmother Silk and the Citadel is the Dies Irae, and this twisted, warped version of the Dies Irae is the theme of the Void, then that actually places the two entities in opposition with each other, both literally and thematically. It also sets us up for a pretty interesting culmination of ideas at the end of the game. We'll come back to this point when we reach the final boss, but for now, I think it's time to move on. So as Hornet descends through the Citadel again, eventually she'll find her way to another Bellway safe room. And here we'll notice that the original Repose theme has been replaced by a track called Reprieve, which features the Dies Irae just as prominently as its counterpart did. This time, however, you'll notice the chords beneath the melodic statements sound much darker and more foreboding. The sense of calm relaxation that once permeated these safe rooms has vanished almost completely in this new twisted version of Pharloom that teeters on the edge of total annihilation. There's no time to relax anymore, just a moment to catch our breath. If we linger too long, death will claim the entire kingdom and everyone in it, Hornet potentially included. Eventually, Hornet dives beneath the lava sea and makes her way to the Abyss, where she learns she'll need something to help her dive into the void and stop Grandmother Silk from struggling so. Interestingly, the Monarch seems to be struggling out of a maternal instinct for Lace, but her struggle will cause the collapse and destruction of the entire kingdom if Hornet can't stop her. As her diving bell was damaged during the descent, Hornet has to climb out of the abyss by hand and needle, something that serves as an incredible set piece and moment in the game, while also gracing us with the track Enter Pharloom, which prominently features the Dies Irae. I don't think there's much subtlety to its inclusion in this song, and there's nothing wrong with that. Death is quite literally on Hornet's heels here. If she slips up, that's it. How much subtlety do we really need? But in a metaphorical sense, the entire kingdom of Pharloom hinges on this climb as well. Many innocent lives are depending on her, and if she fails here, not only will her death be assured, but so too will the deaths of everyone she's come to know on our adventure together. Of course, Hornet doesn't fail, and she's tasked to retrieve 3 old Hearts of Pharloom. Interestingly, the Dies Irae doesn't play at all in the areas directly before or during these 3 boss fights, 4 if you count the Secret Heart as well. This, I think, is because we're delving into the memories of warriors and guardians of Pharloom, beings who remember the height of the kingdom with reverence and pride. There is no death and foreboding decay in those memories, just glory and happiness. However, let's take a moment to talk about the area that we must journey through at the very beginning of our trek towards Scarsinger Carmelita, the Hunter's March. by now you're probably so familiar with the Dies Irae that you can tell it isn't fully present in this track. So what kind of excuse are you about to make for why it's actually included in this piece, I hear you ask? Well, dear viewer, bear with me. See, I believe Hunter's March doesn't actually employ the Dies Irae in full, but instead twists the motif and resolution into a slightly altered melody, one filled with melancholy and regret. If you come here early in the game, you'll find that the Scar tribe is completely unaffected by the threads of the haunting. They retain their sense of self and their pride as warriors. This music, then, could represent the regret of Queen Carmelita at the state of the kingdom and the fact that she can no longer lead her people as she once could. In fact, I'd argue that's exactly why the music is tinged with such sadness and sounds so forlorn. But when you return in Act 3, you'll find that the Void is fully capable of possessing the Scars, which gives a new undertone to this melancholy. Now Carmelita's tribe is just as destroyed as any other group within Pharloom, but this time it's by our own hand. It wasn't a premeditated decision, as the snail shamans weren't entirely truthful with Hornet about what their trap was, but the twisting of the Dies Irae does provide some interesting juxtaposition against the guilt the player might actually feel at causing the death of the last independent race inside Pharloom. At the very least, it underscores the guilt Hornet feels for the same reasons. But fast forwarding now, after collecting the 3 old hearts and retrieving the Everbloom from the Red Memory, Hornet returns to the Abyss, this time fully prepared to confront Grandmother Silk and Lace within the Void. And during this descent, we're treated to the gorgeous track Last Dive. This triumphant piece underscores Hornet's journey into the Void, Everbloom in hand, and it features an incredibly triumphant take on the Dies Irae. The motif is recontextualized in a major key, an underscoring of triumph and heroism now the basis for the altered melody of the Dies Irae. The implication of death and foreboding are still present in the context that this music plays, but the tone and emotion it elicits from the listener is entirely different, inverted from what it normally would be. If the Dies Irae is meant to convey fear and death, then Last Dive is meant to convey hope and life. This one is a bit easier to parse from an emotional standpoint too. Using the Dies Irae in this way seems meant to show that Hornet is bravely staring death in the face without a shred of hesitation by diving into the void of nothingness in an attempt to save Pharloom. There are even a few wistful longing moments in the melody which could represent her desire to save this kingdom she's come to know from what she considers her own failures and mistakes. Ultimately, Hornet comes face to face with Grandmother Silk again, but this time she's greeted by Lace as well, corrupted and possessed by the Void. And at last, the final boss fight begins, accompanied by the beautiful track Lost Lace. The use of the Dies Irae here is similar to the way it's used in Last Dive, but this time the entire arrangement makes it sound wistful and forlorn. There are a few interpretations I have for this, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. First, it obviously represents Lace and the fact that she's been nearly consumed by the Void. She's lost her sense of self and her free will, leaving her in a state of regret and longing for a life she didn't realize she should value more. But if she's left alone with no aid, she will succumb to the Void entirely and cease to be, a somber death at the bottom of the world. Secondly, I believe it can represent the desire of Grandmother Silk to protect her daughter. The reason she's fighting the Void as hard as she is comes down to a motherly desire to protect her child. She sees the Void consuming her daughter and does her best to stave off the death that threatens them, hoping that something might change so she can spare the one she gave life to. And finally, I believe the inclusion of the Dies Irae and the final boss theme also represents Hornet's point of view. In Act 3, Hornet decides to rescue Lace from the Void to calm the Pale Monarch's struggle and save the kingdom of Pharloom. But I believe she also sees something of herself in Lace. They're both beings with circumstances that place them outside of the norm. They've both stood watch over a dead or dying kingdom with nothing they could personally do to save or spare it. And at the very end of her journey, I believe Hornet has come to see enough of her old self in Lace that she wants to save her, not just to stop the Monarch's struggles, but also to grant Lace a chance at a better life than the one she's known until now. If, however, Hornet fails in this mission, the death of everyone and everything in Pharloom will be the result, the culmination of the Dies Irae at long last. Of course, Hornet doesn't fail. She defeats Lace and rescues her from the void. Grandmother Silk even offers the last of her power to Hornet so the two can escape before the void consumes them. And when everything seems to be going perfectly, the Everbloom fades away and the void comes for Hornet. And she's saved from that void by her half-sibling, the knight from the first Hollow Knight. The same way Hornet helped him back during the first game, he in turn helps Hornet now, delivering she and Lace safely from the void, and even pulling its influence away from Pharloom in the process. And you can hear the resolution of this moment clearly in the music that underscores it, Sister of the Void. This last track once again employs our Dies Irae in the same major key reimagining that Last Dive used prior to the final boss, and using the death motif in such a way is very interesting. It not only represents the literal death of the Everbloom, thus leaving Hornet and Lace at the mercy of the void, but the major key Inversion represents the knight's return to save Hornet and help her the same way she helped him in the past. It is the representation of the void's purpose being literally inverted for a brief moment. Despite what the void is naturally inclined to do, the knight influences it and saves his half-sister and her friend, a hopeful and uplifting moment in the face of what seemed to be certain death. Just like Christopher Larkin's recontextualizing of the Dies Irae. And that brings us to the end of our adventure. I don't think it's an understatement to say that the Dies Irae is the motivic cornerstone of the musical journey through Silksong. It's far more present throughout the main game than I first realized, and delving into its use has been very fascinating. But before we wrap up, there is one more thing to talk about. At the beginning of this video, I said to you that I had a few theories as to why the first melody we hear when booting up the game is the Dies Irae, the motif of death. So now that we've finished our journey with Hornet, I'd like to discuss those theories with you. First, there's the obvious interpretation. Pharloom is a kingdom cursed by the Monarch's haunting. Death and darkness lurk in almost every corner of this place, and Hornet has been brought here by unknown captors. She finds herself in a battle for her life and freedom, quite literally staring down death a countless number of times throughout the game. Using the Dies Irae to greet the player prepares them for the hostile and dangerous kingdom they're about to step foot into. But I have another theory as well. It doesn't replace the previous one, but instead underscores another aspect of the game that we've barely had a chance to talk about: Hornet herself. Hornet has grown significantly as a character in her time between the original Hollow Knight and her outing in Silksong. She approaches others with more warmth and compassion than she did when first we met her in Hollow Knight. She wields her needle for the sake of others just as often as she does to defend herself, and she never greets anyone with hostility unless she is threatened first. Hornet has emotionally matured to a large extent between the two games, despite how long she's already lived. And we can see that clear as day through the actions she takes in the third act especially. After spending so much time during Acts 1 and 2 making new friends and acquaintances, granting their wishes and safeguarding their lives and homes, the entire kingdom of Pharloom begins to collapse on itself as a result of her actions. She feels guilt for this and takes it upon herself to rectify the situation, to spare Pharloom from being destroyed completely the way Hallownest once was, no matter how daunting or impossible it may seem. Though Hornet did help the knight in the first game, she never really came off as selfless and friendly. It felt more like she was aiding the knight out of obligation and duty, though she did put herself in danger to assist him at the very end during his fight with the Hollow Knight. Perhaps that was an inkling of the true Hornet shining through for a moment. Just before their final conflict, She says something to Lace in the Abyss that resonated strongly with me. In response to Lace's comment that she should rejoice and let Pharloom crumble, Hornet responds with, "I will not. I have already stood the sentinel for one dying land. That role I will never play again." Those few words, I think, are the clearest example of the fact that we're dealing with a very different Hornet than we met in the first game. She's still an incomparable warrior, and she can be as no-nonsense as we've ever come to know. But even after so long being isolated in a long-dead land, after watching those around her disappear and die as she continued to live on by herself, Hornet still chooses to approach others with kindness and respect. And in Silksong, she has changed the way she approaches the world around her, and perhaps even her view of that world as a whole. So I believe the Dies Irae, the title theme of Silksong itself, represents the death of the old Hornet's ideology and the rebirth of her new self. She's the same character, of course, but she's grown and changed in several significant ways. And that, in part, is why I believe the Dies Irae is the first melody that greets us when we turn the game on. It's a signal to us, the players, that the Hornet we're about to spend the game with isn't the same withdrawn character we knew before. And throughout our adventure in this death-plagued land, we'll meet her anew and experience a journey unlike any other. Hey everyone, thanks so much for watching. I don't normally do videos like this, but I loved my time with Silksong so much that I wanted to do something special in honor of it. And since my wheelhouse is primarily music, I figured why not do a music analysis? This project got so much bigger than I initially planned on it being too. I hope I didn't get too bogged down in the music theory aspect of it. That's not what this video was meant to be about, though I did have to touch on it a few times to make a few points. I wanted this to be pretty easily approachable though, whether you know music theory or not, so I hope I managed to make things at least enjoyable for everyone that might watch. I don't post much anymore as I've had some health problems the last few years that have affected my ability to make videos or stream, but if you're at all interested in checking out some of the music things I've personally done, I used to host a little weekly hang on my Twitch channel I called VGM Jukebox, where people would suggest songs from video games and I would play along with them on my electronic valve instrument. I can't do it these days, but I'll link a playlist of some of my old uploads of those streams. They were a ton of fun, and if you check them out, I hope you enjoy. If you've watched this entire video to this point and enjoyed yourself, please consider liking the video. I won't ask you to subscribe as I'm not necessarily looking to grow this channel, but as you can see, this is an extraordinarily small channel, and a few extra likes might give some more people the chance to see this video. I would love it if this had the chance to reach as many people as possible. I really enjoy sharing my love of music, and Silksong's soundtrack has so many wonderful aspects to it that make it so easy to appreciate and talk about. Lastly, big shoutouts and thank you to BeardBear for providing most of the footage I used in this video. I could have recorded my own new playthrough, but it would have added so much time to this project, so being able to use a video that already existed saved me so much extra effort. I've linked their video down in the description, as well as the French National Orchestra's performance of Symphonie Fantastique, just in case anyone might want to check that out too. Alright, you've listened to me babble for far too long now, so let me finally sign off here. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you're having a wonderful day or night. I've been JR Hall 2, and thank you so much for joining me.